dream but feel stuck, if you are facing obstacles that seem overwhelming, or if you just need a dose of motivation to keep pushing forward, then you are in the right place. So buckle up, dreamers. Anchor Your Dreams is not just a podcast, it's a community of dreamers supporting dreamers, women supporting women. Subscribe, follow along, and let's navigate the seas of ambition together. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. Get ready to be inspired, motivated, and empowered. The journey begins now.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Did you sort out your mic issue?
Yes.
There's always a bit of last minute tech. It's part of it. Like you just have to, it's part of the process.
And just when I think I have these things like known to me, it's like something happens and it doesn't work. And anyways, I think it was more of a user error. Right. Oh gosh. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me and all the way from Australia. What part of Australia are you in?
I'm in Sydney, which is a beautiful city. I'm so blessed to live here, but I'm originally from London. So I moved here when I was 26 and I've lived here for the last 20 years. So you may not be able to tell, but I've got a bit of a mixed up accent. It's part English, part Aussie. It's kind of a hybrid now.
Oh, I love that. It's funny because I love accents. And when I was younger, I thought I was going to be moving to England. I had an aunt that lived there, and part of me was like, I'm going to get an accent. I want to move there because I want an accent. Like I want to gain an accent. And then I thought, that's so silly. Who does that? But it makes sense when you live somewhere for so long, you start picking all of that up. So that's so interesting.
And not just, I mean, the accent's one element, but also slightly different vocabulary as well. Like there's different words that Australians use and American English. I mean, we're all speaking the same language, but there's subtle differences.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it goes from, I'm sure different areas of Australia probably also uses different
Well, it's funny that you say that. Actually, no. I mean, I know in America that's true and in the UK, but the thing about Australia is, first of all, very small population. So we're a huge country, but a tiny population, very spread out. And then also fairly recently, compared to the rest of the world, colonized. So it's only 230 years or something that white settlers have been in Australia. So we haven't really had the opportunity yet for accents to become regional. So there's like a stronger Australian accent and then a less strong one. And that's really about the only difference.
Interesting. And maybe that's one thing that I had noticed just like watching different series and things like that and movies and things. There are some people that definitely have a much stronger accent than others. So help me pronounce this, please. Is it Bhakti?
Bhakti.
Bhakti. Okay.
Yeah. Like Bhakti. Think of a buck, like the deer.
Oh, okay. Bhakti. And
That's
where does that originate from?
So Bhakti is a Sanskrit word. So it originates from the yoga lineage, and it means wise love. So to apply love in a way that is filled with wisdom.
Oh, I love that. Well, speaking of wisdom, you've been a guest on many different podcasts. So one of the things sorry, I have a child walking in here right now with a note that I'm supposed to read. Oh, whoops. Mom fail. I was supposed to unlock the screens before I started this.
Yeah, that's really essential.
So if you don't mind.
Please, I understand how necessary that is. How
So
old are
yeah,
your children?
I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old.
I have an
They're
8-year-old
both,
and a 10-year-old, so I totally understand the territory.
yes, and they love their Minecraft games. Whoops. Sorry. Locked one, unlocked the other.
That's a well-trained child, though, that knows to give a note rather than interrupt. I like that.
We had a big conversation before I started it. And I was like, totally meant to unlock their tablets. But yes, they are good about doing these little notes and helping me in that sense. I do work from home. Like I think I did it. Well, we'll see. I'll get another note, I guess. I also work for some lawyers from home as well. So sometimes I need to be on different conference calls or things like that. So they do learn. I just sometimes forget to give them credit for having that and doing that until it happens. And then I'm like, I'm sorry. Thank you. No. You have 2 or 5 kids? Because in your notes it said 5 kids, but you have 2 that are similar in age. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, 2. I think I read something.
There are 5, but yeah. So my youngest is 2, my eldest is 17, and then I've got a 15-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So they're pretty spread out.
2. Oh gosh, it feels like a lifetime ago to have a 2-year-old, but then at the same time, it feels like it was just yesterday.
Yeah. Well, actually, she's been very easy, partly because she is just an easy human. But also because I've got all the boys, she's a girl. The last one was a girl, and all the rest are boys. They really help with her a lot. So like my 18-year-old he's driving now, he can do things like pick up the little kids from school if I need him to. He's also working, but I get a lot more help. I find it a lot easier than I did when I just had like 1 or 2, and it was mostly all on me. When she's at home and the kids are at home, there's always someone to play with. Like I very rarely have to sit and give her attention, and because there's so many of them, she can kind of cruise around from person to person, and no one gets sick of her, because if somebody's like, go away, I'm busy, she just can go to someone else.
Oh, I love that. I feel like I could just kind of watch the different transition from, sibling to sibling and see how they each interact differently.
Great idea. I should put a little camera on her sometime, and we just do like a little time lapse because half the time I'm like, where is she? Who's she with? What's she doing? It would be fascinating.
That would be. And it's interesting too. I've heard a lot of people say that going from either 1 child to 2 or 2 to 3 is sometimes a difficult thing, but anything 3 and up, it just kind of like is so much easier. And you don't really hear of a lot of larger families like that anymore. There's so many people just have 1 or 2 and that's about it. But
yeah, it is definitely more unusual.
2 is my max. My youngest kind of is like 5 children in one, I feel like. It definitely demands a lot more from me. So 2 was good. Going back to what I was saying before is that you have been on many different podcasts. So I'm actually, if you don't mind, really interested to ask you what makes being a guest on a podcast a better experience, if you can share what is.
Yeah, I love that question. I think there's a few things. I think one is if the person interviewing is a little bit open in terms of where the conversation can go. Like I find if it's a very rigid set of questions, it can start to feel a bit like a job interview or something like that. And it's beautiful when the conversation can just be allowed to flow, wherever it goes. I think that works. And I think listeners prefer that too, because it's like you're literally listening in on a conversation rather than a kind of very formal back and forth. So I love that. I personally also really like, and I'm not sure if every guest would feel the same, but I like being asked difficult questions. Like I'm up for, you know, maybe I don't necessarily agree with you, or we don't necessarily have the same perspective on something, or it's a question I don't even know the answer to. Like, I feel like those are the best questions because they lead to the best conversations. But for a person who is less experienced in giving podcast interviews, that might be quite confronting. Like for me, I'm like, you can ask me anything, you know, and if I don't know, I'll just be fine with that. But I guess if you were a little bit like more nervous, then that could be quite confronting. I think the other thing too is about the guest. Like if you have someone, and there are people out there like this, who has a large divide between their work and their personal life, or, you know, there's a real sort of maybe even a bit of a disconnect, then that can be quite difficult because those people maybe don't want to be asked about anything. Like they're sort of like, we can't talk about these areas, we can only talk about these areas. Whereas for me, I'm like an open book. I'm like, look, ask me anything. And if I can easily talk about the ways in which my business is amazing, but I can also tell you the ways in which I wish I was doing better. Same with parenting. Like it's, you know, I'm relaxed about my strengths and weaknesses. So I think some of it's, you know, some of it is definitely the interviewer, but some of it's the guest and how comfortable they are. Because I've done, in my work, I've also done quite a lot of interviewing people. Like I run summits once a year, virtual summits. And you've probably had this experience too. And it's so fascinating when this happens. It hasn't happened to me a lot, but it has happened a couple of times in my career where I've interviewed someone who I've been so excited to interview, like an author of a book or someone that I've followed for a long time that I love. And I'm like bursting with excitement. And then actually as an interview, like person to interview, they're quite flat. Like they write amazing, or what they put out is amazing, but the conversation is not, it's clunky. And that's so interesting to me. I'm like, oh, I did not expect that to happen. So it takes two, doesn't it? It's like anything, you know, you've both got to be in the zone. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's some of my thoughts.
Oh yes, it sure does. Like that was everything you said was great. Because I have like my form that I get everyone to fill out. And before I started doing this, I definitely felt like I needed to make sure that I would connect with the guest and vice versa before coming on, because that was one of my fears. Was I love talking with people, and I had previously done a podcast with a couple of friends, and I knew that this would be so different and the feel would be different, but I wanted to somehow make it feel easy. And the only way that I could think of was, to suggest to everybody who wanted to be a guest, like listen to the trailer, what sparked something in you, because if something sparked in you out of that trailer, then clearly we're going to have things to talk about. But then I also want to make sure that we're talking about what's important to you, the guest. So, and then the whole asking certain questions. I'm one of those people, like I'll start to kind of listen, and then an idea, a thought, whether it's something I can relate to or something that I really want to know more about, I'll ask. I don't really for myself, I don't think about the question in terms of difficulty or would they answer this. It's just something that pops in my mind, and I'm like, I'm just gonna say it. And yeah, so but you're right, some people do have topics that they don't necessarily want to talk about, and I get that. One of the things, and you and we just kind of started chatting. Normally I go through a little bit of a podcast structure and let my guests know what to expect. And one of those things is, I want this to be a safe space. And if there is a topic or something that you do start talking about, and afterwards you're like, I talked about that with you because I felt comfortable in the moment, but I'd actually not want you to air that, that's fine too. So just
that's
also
very lovely to say that. That does create a beautiful safety for people.
Well, and I think, well, and that's one thing that I've realized over, the years is when you talk to someone that you feel safe with, you do tend to open up a lot more. And that's this container. That's just this container right here. But then, of course, leaving the interview, it can get overwhelming, this idea that there could be who knows how many hundreds of people or thousands upon hundreds of thousands of people listening to what you're saying. So I'm not quite there yet in numbers.
It might not necessarily be something you didn't want to talk about, but I've definitely done interviews where afterwards I've been like, oh, I just didn't articulate that very well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not happy with the way that I explained that, or like it didn't come out quite right. Like maybe it seemed a bit, I don't know, like prejudice or a bit ignorant or something like that. And then you'd want to retract that because you kind of realize, oh, that wasn't me at my best. So yeah, I think that's lovely that you offer that. The other thing that was really good about setting everything up with you is it was so easy from an admin perspective. I love the form and the email replies and like so seamless. I love that. Like it was just a dream.
Thank you for that feedback. That was one of the things originally that I got hung up on was like, sorry, I do want to ask you all these other important questions too about you. But that's really nice feedback to hear because it was something that I tried to put myself in as a guest and like what the steps were and how easy. I didn't want you to have to go to all these places or back and forth scheduling for, because that's what I was doing originally before I had a calendar set up. And it was time consuming for me and it was kind of energy sucking. And I was like, if I keep doing this, I don't know if I can even continue. So I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. So Buck Rose. Now your name is Katie Rose. So Bhakti Rose is your business name?
Correct.
I love that you've kind of taken something personal from you, part of your name, and added it in there. And I love roses and the smell of them and everything. So I was really kind of like engaged in that as well. So as we get started into this more into this conversation, can you share a little bit about what your journey has been like, sort of a little bit of your startup to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I have been a yoga teacher and a wellness mentor, Ayurveda practitioner for a long time. I left school when I was very young. I left at 16 and went and started to work in a yoga studio because I had this yearning and this passion for the teachings of yoga. And so it's really been my entire career. That was back when I still lived in the UK. So I lived and worked in London for 10 years in various different yoga studios and natural health centers and did different trainings and yeah, had lots of beautiful opportunities then to study deeper and just to really set the foundation, I guess you could say. Then I moved to Australia in 2004. And I opened up my own studio. So I got to Sydney, Australia, and I realized there was not much of an industry back in 2004 of yoga. And, in London, it was exploding at that time. It was really the peak. It was when Madonna was, making her Ray of Light album. And it was all just a big yogic explosion, but not so much here in Sydney. So it was kind of just very fortunate timing that I happened to get here. I came following a boyfriend, so it was nothing to do with my career. And I found myself in Sydney and there was just like 2 other yoga studios. So I was like, okay, I'm going to open a studio. And it was the kind, when I look back now, I feel like my older self would probably talk myself out of it. But when you're young and bold and you've got nothing to lose, you often just throw yourself at these things. And it feels, at least for me, it didn't feel scary. It felt exciting. And the studio was a great success. I really focused on building community. And because the other thing was I just arrived in a new country. I didn't know anyone. I had no friends. So not only did I create a livelihood for myself, but I also created a social and spiritual community, which was so wonderful. And I still have many close friends now, 20 years later, that are from that time. So the studio ran for, in different permutations, it evolved and we changed location, but it ran for a good, oh gosh, I think 12 or more years, and expanded. And eventually I had 4 studios in 4 different locations across Sydney. And at that point, when I had the 4 studios, I got pregnant with my 3rd child. And I basically just said to my husband at the time, I was like, I can't, it's either another baby or the studios have to go. Like, I just cannot keep all these balls in the air. It was really draining. Even though I loved it, I loved being a mum and I loved running the studios. But, you know, anyone who's a mother who is also runs a business knows it feels like a lot. So I decided to take a break. I passed the studios on, and again, in different sort of variations, they still exist. So I feel like that was really beautiful. There's a sense of legacy there, which is really lovely. And then I had a bit of a break. I was still working. I'd still teach for other people and, you know, teach on some different teacher training programs and what have you, but it was more dabbling than serious work. And then 6 years ago, I got divorced. And at that point, we had 4 children. And I moved just down the road from my ex-husband. I still live just down the road from him, and we co-parent for the most part, quite successfully. And, you know, our kids are very much back and forth between the houses, and we're still, very much in each other's lives. But I did need to start standing on my own 2 feet financially. So it was a big shift. It was like I went from being very financially dependent on my husband, who earned a good income, so we were very comfortable, to suddenly not having all of that ease and comfort. And I've always been quite an entrepreneurial person. I think that's definitely part of my personality, part of my kind of, just who I am. So I decided at that time to start an online business. I had a lot of experience. Mostly what I was teaching by then was yoga philosophy. So, and sort of lifestyle more than the physical practice. So I started an online business around pregnancy yoga, Ayurveda and yoga philosophy. And I didn't have a hugely clear vision about where it was going to go, but I knew I needed to generate income. And I often say to people, when it comes to the business side of things, especially spiritual people, the biggest motivator is when you need the money. And I don't mean that in a kind of crass way in any way, but I know for myself, I've had times in my life where I could play at working and it could kind of be a hobby and I could have a side hustle, but it didn't actually matter if it generated income, versus this is going to pay my mortgage, this is going to feed my kids. And it comes with a different level of discipline. That's the word I would use. Like, I would wake up in the morning and I would be very focused on creating a website, creating content, thinking about marketing, because I knew if I didn't make that work, I'd have to go out and get a job. And with 4 children, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to be able to be around for them, you know, and also I've been self-employed forever, and it felt, I mean, I did consider it in the early days. I did think maybe I just need to go out and work for someone else. But the business grew, and I was very fortunate. Again, there've been so many blessings in my life, but I was fortunate that COVID happened about 18 months into my business. The pandemic happened, and I had just got to the point where I was really happy with all the offerings that I had. Like, I had a really solid website, I had really solid programs, I knew what I was doing, I had my branding in place. Like, it was 18 months in and it felt robust. And then all of a sudden the whole world wanted to learn online. So I just got really lucky, you know, it was that timing, it couldn't have been better. I was so ready, and that's when my business really started to blossom, and really has just gone from strength to strength since then.
Oh, wow. What a journey. And I imagine that some of the community that you had from the studios also really supported you and showed up for you when you changed and sort of transitioned into the online way of doing things. Did you find that they really wanted to follow you to what you were doing? Did you find that there was sort of like, yes, you had a multitude of studios, but there was also you that was at the sort of the head of it? Did you find that a lot of people not only showed up for themselves for the yoga and learning and everything, but also for you as the owner, as the founder of these studios too?
Yeah, I love that question. And I haven't really reflected on it that much, to be honest. But what comes to me when you ask me is yes and no. When I ran the studios, it took me time to really come into, as a teacher, as a yoga teacher, and as a mentor, making it oriented around me as a person. When I was in my 20s and my 30s, I think I felt very much like, who am I to be a spiritual teacher? Like, even the word spiritual teacher would have kind of freaked me out because I felt like a baby. And it was much more about me showcasing my teachers and other more senior teachers. So when we had the studios, one of the things that was really successful is bringing in, and again, this is we're going back in time. So it's pre-Zoom, it's pre-online learning, bringing in teachers from all over the world. I mean, my teachers, Sharon Gannon and David Life, who are American, they came over multiple times. We brought different teachers from literally all over the world. And that was a great part of our success. So what I was really good at when I was running the studios was creating community and then bringing teachers in to that community. But it wasn't really so much about me. I mean, I did teach, but I certainly didn't see myself then as a senior teacher. And then when I passed the studios on and sort of had that break, that's when I really started to come into myself with more confidence, as I've got something to share with my own wisdom. I'd had a bunch of children by then. I'd lived through a divorce. I had some really solid life experiences, and all through all of those things, my spiritual practice had kept me steady. Like, it was the yoga that had kept me, feeling steady, feeling stable, feeling good even. And
that
so
was sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was the constant in your life amongst all the other change and everything that was going on. That was the one thing that was constant for you.
That's exactly right. That was the thread. That was the ground, the earth. Yes. And so when I decided to do the online business, I was ready. I was ready to say, okay, this is about me, not in an egotistical way at all, but just to be the face. Like, if I look back, it sounds silly, but if I look back at my Instagram grid, I never put pictures of my face or me or made it about me. I didn't even write in the first person. I would write we or talk about the business, but it wouldn't be coming from me. Whereas now I don't hesitate to do a video, to put my face in photos. I speak in the first person now. People know it's me, so it kind of seems silly to hide behind we or the name of a business. And yeah, I feel comfortable with that. But that's been a long journey. And to answer your question, yes, many people did come with me on that journey. And I think it took me by surprise, because I didn't think that they were ever there for me, really. But turns out quite a few were. And now I just have the most beautiful, heartwarming stories of women, and most of my work is with women who have been in my community for 20 years. I mean, we've watched each other have children, go through all life events, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, you name it. And it's so beautiful. I mean, nothing lights me up more, and it happens all the time, than someone coming back into my world and saying, oh, I used to take yoga class with you 15 years ago, or, oh, I read your book that you wrote, 10 years ago. And I love that so much.
Oh, that's so many things that you went back to and said really kind of resonated. And one of them was when you were talking about bringing other teachers in, and kind of, rather than the focus being you, showcasing other people. And it's really interesting because that's essentially kind of why I decided to do a podcast, is rather than be the speaker myself, I'm trying to allow other people to do the speaking more or less. And then when you said saying we, and kind of, even though it was you that was behind everything and only you, that's another thing. I just had a conversation with someone the other day, and I was like, because I'm pretty sure on my website some of the things refer to we, and they're like, why is that? I was like, it's kind of a good question, but I think when I wrote that out, I wasn't confident in being, I think part of it is held accountable and responsible for all the things, even though my heart was in all of it. So I'm trying really hard to change all the we's to I's, because my heart is what leads it all. And although I'm thinking about it in a collective way, when I say we, I mean we as in the guests, we as in the audience, we as in that. So I'm a lot more mindful about how I approach that.
It's interesting. I think if we go back a few years, the we thing was often, and this happened a lot in the coaching industry, it was sort of, and I'm not saying at all this is what you did or I did, because I don't think in our cases it is, but a lot of people would say we to sort of imply like, oh, there's a big team behind me, or like, you know, like almost like a corporation, you know, like it's this big entity, it's plural, it's more than just little old me at home on my laptop. And that was kind of what people wanted. It was like, oh, that's professional, and that's, you know, it's like all the bells and whistles. But actually now I think it's kind of a full circle moment where people don't want that at all. We're so over big corporations and nameless, faceless organizations. We love the individual at home, you know, in their intimate space, sharing from their heart. Like that feels so much more real and so much more genuine. And yeah, I've really realized that too. I don't need everything to be super professional and polished and perfect. It's okay to just show up as I am, and people can relate to that. It's so much more real.
Yeah, I agree. And especially nowadays with the social media and the quote unquote highlight reel of everything. And that is part of all of this for me as well, as bridging that gap. While you are at a very successful stage of making 6 figures in your business, there are people out there that are not sharing how they got there. They're just flashing it on a screen to say that you too can make this, but where's the messy middle of it? How do I get there? Sure, I can start up right now, but I still need guidance, and I still need to understand that there are real people that have gone through all the different things, all the different transitions, possibly divorce, or other forms of grief in their life, and still were able to make it to that stage. So thank you for sharing that, because it is true that people really are over the big corporations. They do want to see real people, and that's what I think meeting one-on-one and approaching it from a heart-centered place is really allowing that all to come out. One of the things that you had mentioned that your life's work is bridging the gap between the unknown and the known. So kind of going back to what I was saying about, this highlight reel aspect of things, that's what we think we know. When we look online and we see things, that's face value. So there is so much behind that is unknown. And I would love to hear sort of what your take is on in that way, in sort of a clear and practical connection.
There's a couple of things there. The first is that the truth is everything is unknown. You know, if we want to talk about what we think we know and what's unknown, the only true reality is that we have no idea what's about to happen next. And one of the things that I often reflect on, and this sounds so morbid, but it isn't morbid at all. It only sounds morbid because of the way our culture thinks about death. But, you know, we don't know how much time we have left. And it could, you know, today could be my last day on the planet, really, truly. And I think about that sometimes, and I truly mean not in a morbid way, just in a way of like, are my affairs in order? Am I good in my heart? Is there something unresolved that I need to tend to? Have I been hurtful? Have I left something undone that was important? Is there a conversation I need to have with one of my children? Whatever it might be, like living life in this way that really acknowledges that we're living in the unknown. And being in reverence and awe of that rather than fear. So that's one part. And then on a more practical level, I feel, and again, this is something I've grown into, like I feel so much more clear about who I am now at 46 than I ever have before. And for that reason, I really love the aging process. I don't necessarily love the physical aging process. Like I wouldn't mind still having the energy of 25-year-old me, but the wisdom that comes with aging as a woman, I think is such a beautiful thing, and it's not celebrated enough in our culture. So part of my work is that celebration. And one of the things that I've worked very hard on in my life over years consistently is to not have huge gaps between the person I want to be and the person I am. So I try very hard to, as far as possible, and of course it's never perfect, but to align my values and my what is important to me with my actions. So for example, if I say I'm an animal rights activist, I care about animals, I'm not going to eat meat, right? Or if I say I believe in good communication with my children, I'm going to apologize to them when I shout at them. Doesn't mean I'm not going to shout at them, but when I do, I'm going to acknowledge it, and we're going to speak about it, and I'm going to take responsibility for it. So these are just two small examples, but the point is, when you live like that, or when you at least attempt to live like that, there's nothing that you feel fearful about showing people. Like last night, this was really interesting actually, and I think this is somewhat relevant to what you just asked me. My son wanted to look for a video of him when he was younger on my phone, and it's back far through all the photos I'd taken. It's from a few years ago. And I gave him my phone, and he was hesitant because he was like, do you mind if I scroll through all your pictures? You know, it's a very intimate thing actually to share the entire contents of your phone. And I had to think for a moment. I was like, you know what? Totally fine. Go for it. And what a beautiful thing that there's no hidden, there's no shadow, you know. It's like I pretty much, actually, because I thought about it afterwards, I pretty much let anyone look at my phone. There's nothing going on in my life that is a skeleton in the closet, or that makes me clench up and go, oh, I don't want people to know about that. And that's taken work. That didn't just come. That's not just natural. I've had to, for example, again, just another small example, stop gossiping. You know, how easy is it for us to just say a little mean thing, text a little gossipy remark about one friend to another friend? You know, like when we stop doing those things, there's nothing to hide anymore. And it's a very relaxing way to be. So I'm not in any way saying I'm perfect. I make mistakes all the time, but I am transparent. And I think that dance between known and unknown, that transparency is part of that dance.
Oh, yes. I feel that very deeply. I really do, because that is that's exactly how I try to show up in the world with my kids as well. And with my friends, going back to sort of the gossiping thing as well. It is easy to get caught up in that kind of stuff. And over the last couple of years, I've really tried hard to be like, okay, whatever's about to come out of your mouth, is that something that you would say to this person to their face? If it's a no, then do not say it. If it's a, well, maybe, then question that again, kind of thing. If you would say that, or you're hesitant, why are you hesitant? And then that to me is, I just try to get curious about everything. I think that's really what, for me, sort of boils down to. We don't know everything. And like you said, and kind of going back to the piece about death, I am not afraid of death either. Like, what I think, and I thought about it not too long ago, I think what a lot of people actually fear more is suffering. And they connect death with suffering. And that oftentimes, I think, is why they just marry the two, and rather than having open conversations about these other things, like, yeah, like, today could be our last day. So is there a conversation that we might want to have? Is there something that we might want to repair before that happens? And I think people sometimes go from one extreme to another. It's that you only live once, YOLO, do all the things because you never know what your last day is going to be. But also there's just the intentional showing up from your heart slowly about like, okay, well, what at the end of the day could I do to have a better tomorrow? So that if today or tomorrow was to be my last day, that it's kind of taken care of, so to speak.
Yeah. And sometimes that idea of do all the things, we think about that in a sort of hedonistic or materialistic way, like, oh, I'm going to go on a holiday or, whatever it might be. But sometimes the do all the things is do the really hard things, have the difficult conversation, start the business, even though you feel very scared and unsure. Whatever your big goal is, your kind of bucket list dream, some of those things are going to be things that require a lot of time, effort, energy, bravery, courage. And so, yeah, that part of that YOLO, if we take it out of the cultural context of just like, I'm going to buy a bunch of stuff and, be very materialistic and hedonistic, it's, okay, well, I don't have forever. So if I don't start this business now, maybe I never will. And that's another thing about middle age, right? When you're in your 20s and your 30s, you don't think about it. Everything seems infinite. Like I've got forever. It doesn't matter. What I spoke about before when I opened my first yoga studio, I was like, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll do something different. Who cares? I don't really think like that anymore. I think like, okay, I don't have forever. 5 years can just go like so quick. Where do I want to spend my precious time? What am I going to do with the time that I have left? It feels more important.
I like that. What am I going to do with the time I have left? I love that. A lot of people, well, listeners, I should say, are women who probably have kids or are eventually going to have kids, and they're entrepreneurs. So we have talked about kids quite a bit already, but how did you juggle it all as being an entrepreneur and having kids? And if you can recall sort of when you maybe had, 2 kids, what was it like for you? Because it did sound like it was a little bit trickier.
Well, there have been lots of different phases. I've got 5 children and they're spread out over 18 years. So there have been lots of different phases of the parenting journey for me, which I think is helpful because it means I can speak to different people's circumstances and probably relate to a lot of different circumstances. When I was married, and I have 4 boys with my ex-husband, we had a pretty comfortable financial situation. So I had a lot of help. We lived with our in-law, his parents. So I lived with my parents-in-law. And in the beginning, they were part of the sort of support team. But then over the time that we lived with them, they became older and more frail, and actually they've both passed away now. So it ended up that we were actually caring for them. So at certain points I had not only young children, but also elderly family members in my home that I was caring for alongside the children. But, and I'm just going to be really blunt and upfront about this because it's the truth, money helps a lot. So, you know, we had a cleaner and I had a nanny and we had someone that would come in and do the garden. And, you know, I had a very beautiful, very supported life. And I had the money to do things like buy organic food from the farmer's market, go to the beautiful Waldorf Steiner playgroup that was expensive. Like, it makes a big difference. And anyone that says it doesn't is usually someone who has a lot of money and doesn't realize their privilege.
Right. Yes.
So that was that part. And then after the divorce, I suddenly plummeted into still being deeply privileged in comparison to 99% of the world, but really having to count the pennies, not being able to go to the supermarket and buy whatever I want, losing a lot of that support network, could not afford a nanny, could not afford a cleaner, you know, was doing all of those things suddenly myself. And it's so interesting. When I look back on those two phases of my life, I can honestly say both had a lot of happiness, both had a lot of challenges, but it wasn't that one was so much better because the money was present, and one, there was something about the grit of the struggle and the doing it myself that was also very beautiful, and building something from the ground up without a safety net. Maybe that's just my personality, but I love a challenge like that, and it really motivated me. So the second phase after the divorce, when I was building the online business, I mean, my goodness, I just worked really, really hard. I honestly did. And people ask me all the time, well, how did you build such a successful online business? And the honest truth is hard work. And I know that's not a sexy answer. I know it's not a like, I made, you know, $50,000 in a launch and I didn't even get out of my pajamas kind of answer. But I would work when the babies were sleeping. I would work at night when I put the babies to bed. I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work for a couple of hours before they woke up. I would put them in a little playpen and sit and work next to them. I'd, you know, be answering emails on my laptop while they're playing in the bath. Like, you know, I used every moment of every day. I used every opportunity. I hustled. I visioned, you know, not only did I work hard on a sort of practical and strategic level, which I did, I also worked really hard on my mindset. I got a great coach. I did a lot of vision boarding and visualizing and mindset, just solid work, and it paid off. And I think, you know, I really believe if a woman has access to the internet and a laptop and a vision for something she wants to create, if she's willing to work hard and consistently, not just for like a month and then, oh, that was exhausting, I'm going to throw it all in the bin and give up. Consistently, diligently over years, you've got to play a long game.
Yes.
Everything is possible. Everything is possible. But if you buy into the dream that it can all happen within a week and that there's a magic spell that can occur and it will just, money will start raining down from the sky, in my experience, that isn't how business grows.
And I don't know if that's the way I would want my business to grow in the first place. And it's easy to say that now, and I feel like because of my age, I feel like but also like you, I do like a challenge. So if it came too easy for me, I feel like I'd get kind of bored really quick, or the connection to it probably wouldn't be as strong. The long game, that is probably the best word that I have found over the last year about doing anything. It is a long game. And even with this podcast, like, I very naively thought, oh yeah, I'll get sponsors and I'll get, you know, no problem, I'll monetize this podcast, easy peasy. Oh my goodness, like so naive to think that way. But I'm okay with it too, you know, and it is the long game. And I know that the connections that I'm making with all the different guests and the listeners and everything, to me, that's the center, or sort of like that circle around the center, which is my heart in it, that I'm really looking for. And if eventually I get there, great. But there's that piece that I would way rather it be the long game part of it.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on there, which is another essential ingredient in a successful business, especially a business that has any kind of spiritual anything connected to it, is orienting yourself in the mode of service and community rather than sales and what can I get from these people. You know, it's like, to use your example of the sponsorship, it's like, okay, you could go out there and hustle and find sponsors and sell yourself and what have you, or you build this beautiful community, you focus on the guests and the listeners and the service element, and then the thing grows, because that's what happens, especially in communities of women. We expand and elevate each other for the most part, and all of a sudden the sponsors come knocking on the door and they want you, rather than you've had to go out and look for them, because you've come from this place of generosity and giving. And that's another thing I've learned in business over and over again. When I give more, when I'm generous, when I really orient everything I do around service and caring, like I really care about the women that come into my programs, that they actually get the outcome they want. Nothing breaks my heart more than someone signing up for an online program with me and then never logging in. I'm like, please do the thing that you paid the money to do, you know, because I know it will be transformative for you. Like I want so desperately for people to, do the things. So I think that's a huge part of it too, is the attitude of how can I give? How can I be generous? How can I build community? How can I serve? And then it really just, all the abundance flows from there.
Well, exactly. And just sort of going back to that too, I'm also realizing that it's become more of a spiritual thing, like as I'm getting older, versus like, you know, what year? Well, it's 2024. So 2020, when I had this idea of building like an online community, and everything in me I was ready to pour so much into everyone that signed up for that. And when I would see people not attend some of the stuff that I had created, it wasn't so much of a feeling of rejection on my part, but it was like this deep knowing that they really could utilize. And then I thought, you know what? At the same time, there's a reason why they're not showing up. And that has to be okay too. And that's the thing that I think with wisdom that has come a lot more, that there's a reason why people show up for things, and there's a reason why I connect with them differently than another person. Sort of going back to, we kind of going a few different places here with this conversation, but I kind of wanted to go back to, you know, the moment where you switched, and going back to the divorce, as far as switching gears, because I do know in my community, as well as in other communities, there are lots of women who really feel like they won't make it after, because financially, they're either relying, no, I shouldn't say relying, but there's a lifestyle that was created as a couple, and they are no longer a couple, and that lifestyle no longer is there. So I do feel like there are either lots of women who feel like they won't be able to start doing something, creating a business, or they're going to have to end the business that they may have already created because of that happening in their lives. So if you could share a little bit more. You did mention it was kind of a had to thing for you as well. But if you could share how you stayed motivated as well as supported by a community that you had to get through all of that.
It's a great question. And I do see a lot of women stay in unhappy marriages for financial reasons. I see that a lot. And first of all, and this might sound ironic coming from someone who's divorced, but really the first thing I would say is, when you find yourself in that situation, work on your marriage as much as you can. That would be my first piece of advice, because sometimes what we think we need the marriage to end, and actually we just need to do things a little differently. So I genuinely see women giving up on relationships way too easily, and we can kind of go into that sort of like all men are dreadful kind of eye rolling type vibration, and I think it's really unhelpful. So that would be my first thing. And I would say, strangely, since divorce, my ex-husband and I have kind of done that work now, so that we have a healthy co-parenting relationship, and we do well co-parenting.
So back to what you were saying, working on the marriage and trying sort of like taking pause and doing something differently versus sort of an all or nothing maybe way of thinking about.
Right. Yeah, rather than polarizing. And if you are going to stay in a marriage for financial reasons, which is totally valid, like if you've gotten to a certain level of comfort and lifestyle that you enjoy, and that getting divorced is going to completely compromise that, I understand why women would stay in that situation. I really do. But then make the situation the best it can be. You're two human beings together. Don't live in resentment and bitterness. I have a very close friend who was in a very challenging marriage around the same time I got divorced. I got divorced, she stayed married, and her husband have worked so hard on their marriage in the years in between. And I have so much admiration for where they're at now. Like, it's so beautiful. And at the time I was advocating, I was like, you should leave him, he's dreadful, because I was on the leave him train. But they have healed and grown together and worked through a whole bunch of stuff. So that's another thing that's come with wisdom. It's easy to just kind of throw things away. It's harder to take responsibility for your part and also heal together. However, sometimes the right thing to do is separate, and that is what it is. And, it is the right thing to do. And honestly, we just have to make a decision at that point, because how attached are you to your lifestyle and to, a certain level of material comfort? Like, for me personally, and I don't mean this with any vanity, it just is the truth. It's very comfortable and lovely to live in a nice house. And, we had a swimming pool and we had all the things, and it was very beautiful and lovely. We'd throw big parties every Christmas. And, I thoroughly enjoyed all of that. But that's not actually what's important to me. It's not my deepest value. My deepest value is my emotional, spiritual, and mental health, my relationship with my children. You can make things look very shiny on the outside, but the core can be very rotten. And I'm interested in the core. So when the divorce happened, for me, the first few years were all about maintaining closeness with my children. It was all about keep the children close. And there was a lot less money. And their dad was still around. So it's not like, they would go back and forth between the houses. My elder two live permanently with me now, but back then they were all back and forth. And I worried for a long time. I had a very legitimate worry, like they're not going to want to be at my house because my house doesn't have a swimming pool and isn't like, they don't all have their own beautiful air conditioned bedrooms. And, you know, it's just not the same bar. But the truth is actually, and it was a very beautiful validation, they just want a relationship with their mother. So I gave them a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of love. And we came through that phase. And now all of us have good, close relationships. So rather than focusing on the financial side of things, for me, it was all about the relationships. And also, I just don't care that much. Like, sure, I'd love to eat in a fancy restaurant if it's available, but I'm also really happy to eat rice and lentils and stay home. Like, both could be really beautiful for me.
Oh, I love that. It's so true. I feel like consumerism we get so wrapped up in and from a luxury standpoint as well. And that includes having hired help for different things. I am curious, after the lifestyle change, did you find it was hard to focus, knowing, for instance, that you had a pile of laundry that you no longer had help with, to focus on your business? How did you get over? Because for me, there's always going to be a sacrifice. There's always going to be some form of a sacrifice. It's either going to be the laundry, it's going to be my floors. I do not recommend eating off of them right now. It's it's going to be my yard. Like, there's always going to be some level of sacrifice, because I will never sacrifice my relationship with my kids, or now as well as my husband, because sort of going back to that is something that I also realized. I can easily get wrapped up in the shiny things in the moment, because I'm passionate about it, but also starting to realize that slowing down and being present. So going back to what my actual question was, did you find it a little bit difficult in the first little while, the first, I guess, couple of years, to really feel, I'm going to put this word in quotes, balanced between business and personal life?
Yes. And not just for the first couple of years, like that's still something I work on every day as my business grows and expands. And I now have support. I have, you know, support with social media, and I have a VA, and I have help in my business. But it's never ending, that juggle, and I don't think it will ever go away. So part of being okay with that is acknowledging it's never ending, and there's no perfect moment. You know, it's just a constant kind of keep working through it. Part of it is systems and organization. So I am very routined, and I do have a lot of systems in place, and I am organized. So little things like I drop my daughter's in daycare 3 days a week. So they're my main working times. Like, she's in daycare now while I'm talking to you. So I drop the kids at school, I drop my daughter to daycare, and then usually the house is a complete mess, because it's like 5 kids leaving the house in the morning does not a perfectly curated home make. So then I literally, this is a good multitasking example. I'm usually at any given time doing 1 or 2 online courses, might be expanding my knowledge in the areas that I teach, like Ayurveda, birthing, what have you, or might be business courses. Like, for a long time I'm doing less now because I'm very established now, but for a long time I was learning how to build an online business. So I did a bunch of courses and coaching. So I'll pop in an earbud, I'll pop on a lecture or a podcast or something that's actually going to help me develop my business, not just recreational. You know, I don't listen to true crime. It seems like everyone in the world.
I was just going to say, so not listening to true crime all day.
No, so not that, or just something I would listen to that's just like a phase out, like something that's actually moving the dial on my business. And then this is how disciplined I am, but this is the truth of how I do it. I'll set a timer and I'll be like, right, half an hour, blitz the house. I don't get to like stop and get distracted and start rearranging the bookshelf or, you know, whatever it might be. It's like each room, make the beds, throw some clothes in the laundry, put the laundry on, clean up the kitchen, put the dishwasher on, bang, it's done. And then I always start with the biggest piece of work that I don't want to do. So if I'm in writing mode, get the writing done. If I'm, who knows, could be a tech problem, it could be anything, get that done. The big item of the day, just one thing, not a list of 20 things, because that's another way you get nothing done, is by having too much on your list of things to do. Smash that out. And then after that, then I let myself go a little bit more into tinkering around, pottering around. I might make some lunch, you know. Quite often I will also give myself a half-hour rest in the middle of the day, which I used to not do because I used to feel so guilty, but I've learned that's hugely serves my nervous system. So if I lie down and do a guided relaxation, a meditation, honestly, even just like literally a nap for just half an hour, 40 minutes, that's phenomenal for me. Like I just feel like a completely different human when I get to do that in the middle of the day. And I do that often now. And then I go and get the kids. So that's kind of the big chunk of the working day done. And then another thing, I mean, I won't go through my whole day because it's too long, but a couple of other things I'll say on that topic, because I get asked about this so often. I don't spend a lot of time watching mindless TV or scrolling on the internet. So I do that a bit because I'm a human being. But it's really limited. I don't spend hours of every day or like in the evening just numbing out in front of the TV or numbing out in front of Instagram. So that's a huge time saver. I'm very intentional about what I do with my time. And the second thing is I give my kids a lot of time and attention, and I feel that I do a really good job of being present for them. And they know I work, and they are respectful around even my 2-year-old now. I mean, it's sort of sometimes quite humorous. Like she'll ask for my attention for something and I'll say, just wait a minute, or hang on, I'm coming. And she'll be like, oh, are you working? And it's like, no, I'm, you know, in the shower or something like that. But she understands that mummy works and that means she can't be interrupted. Like she gets that as a concept. And I think too many of us, because of mum guilt, which is so huge, we don't want to say to our children, I'm working, I'm busy, I'm doing something. It's like, okay, sweetie, I'm here, but I'm not really here. But I'm here, but I'm not really here. Like, it's okay to say to your kids of any age, I mean, bar like a newborn breastfeeding infant, that's probably quite different. But like any child that can understand language, I'm busy right now. I'm here for you and I will tend to you, but you also may have to wait a moment. I'm shocked by how many mothers of 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds say that they can't have a moment to themselves in the day, that they can't get anything done because their children are, for example, off school because they're sick or it's school holidays or whatever. I think one of the best things we can do is train our children to entertain themselves, ideally without a screen. You know, sometimes we have to use the screens too. I totally do that. Don't misunderstand me. But, you know, it's not just, oh, give them an iPad and that's always the solution. And that sometimes we're not available. The one challenge with that, which is something you just have to suck up and be okay with, and I do have to work on that a little bit, is children who are entertaining themselves without the input of an adult or a screen make mess. So, you know, it's like, okay, the kids are going to play, I'm not giving them a screen, and then the room is going to be very messy after that. And I'm okay with that because I asked you to entertain yourselves and you played tea parties for an hour and a half and now it looks like a bomb's gone off. That's the trade-off, and that's okay.
Well, exactly. And that kind of goes back to there's always going to be a little bit of a sacrifice. Trade-off, I like that word. It doesn't feel so negative as sacrifice does. And it's funny that you say that too, because before this, my youngest, bless her, after an hour of having some free time, she decided it would be a good time to do some baking. Now her older sister had just gotten home, and I'm like, no, that's not happening, because I knew I was going to be doing this. And I thought, okay, she's going to start baking, and then she's not even going to be ready to do the baking until I'm probably getting onto this call with you. Oh no, that can't happen. I was like, nope, nope. She's like, well, but mom, it's okay. I'm not going to do anything wrong. I was like, I know. However, for me, myself, I just need you to find something quiet to do while I'm doing this call. But also going back to what you were saying, I think one of the things that was or has been quite apparent to me, even with my own kids, is not giving them enough credit for their understanding of communication and of what we need. And what happens to me as well is I do work a lot. As I said before, I work for lawyers as well. So I'm constantly on my phone dealing with emails and putting out fires and doing different things. And I'll have my phone, I'm trying to write an email or do something, and it's, Mom, I need this. Mom, I need that. And I'll say just a second or just a minute. And I can't remember how old she was. But after like the third time, it was like, she said something. It stopped me in my tracks. And it was like, oh yeah, I have actually already said that to you multiple times. So it's actually been not just a minute or just a second.
Yeah.
It's actually been like 10 minutes. And you actually have been extremely patient. I just didn't communicate to you what I needed. And I've done much better at asking for what I need. And that's usually not just a minute. It's 10 minutes, or I'll explain. I'm writing an email, and as soon as I'm done, that's when I'll be able to give you my full attention.
Yeah. And we have to cultivate trust in our children by being good for our word with that. That's important. Like if I say to my kids, look, I'm working all morning. Okay, we're going to be at home. I'm going to be working, but this afternoon, I'm going to take you swimming, or I'm going to take you to this beautiful park, or we're going to do this fun activity. Then you have to do the thing, because that's how they understand that you are trustworthy. And then it's a fair exchange, right? I was joking with a friend of mine the other day who has one child, and she came and stayed with us. So we spent some time together. And it sort of dawned on me at some point that her response rate to her child was 100%. So every time he said, Mum, she was fully present, engaged, eye contact, what is it? What do you need? And I realized that my response rate was like hovering somewhere around 50%. It's like, Mum, Mum, Mum. And like half the time, I'm just like, I'll come to it when I'm ready. And that's because there's so many. Like I've got 5 of them, like mom, 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 But I in the past, I would have felt so guilty about that. When I had one child or 2 children, I was like, oh, it's so important that I'm available for them and they feel listened to and heard and what have you. And now I realize they know I'm available for them. If it's important, they will make themselves heard. You get the vibe, when it's like they need to talk about something, and then you make space for it. And I also do make space to spend one-to-one time with each of my kids. I do that consciously because that's very important. Even if you've only got 2, sometimes one-to-one time is very precious and important. But it's also okay to not be 100% available all the time and fully engaged. It's okay. It shows your kids you're human and they are fine.
Yes, they certainly are fine. I think it comes back to that whole mom guilt thing. And when you are an entrepreneur and you're the one that's doing the thing, you have no one else. You can't blame a boss. You can't say, well, my boss wants me to work. and go in after picking you up and dropping you off. I need to go back to the office. You can't blame anyone. It's on you. So not only is it on you as the mom, it's on you as the entrepreneur, as the boss, as the everything. What tips can you share with the audience for staying motivated during like low points, or perhaps like getting through challenging times?
Yeah, two big ones. Number one, start doing something, even if it's a micro action. So usually when we're feeling overwhelmed or we're a bit flat and lacking in motivation, it's because the thing that we want to do feels enormous. Like, let's say it's, I have to build a whole website. I have to create a whole website, right? That feels like such a big task, so easy to just put off each day because, oh, so big. So start by, okay, today I'm going to write the words for the about page of my website. Tomorrow I'm going to source 5 photographs that I can use, and I'm going to put it in a folder along with the words I wrote yesterday. Next day is a break day. The day after that, I'm going to figure out the headers, the menu bar for my website. Like, so micro tasks, but you keep chipping away at it. And that's where the discipline comes in. It's like each day I'm going to do something that has a productive outcome towards this website. And then what often happens 9 times out of 10 is the project takes on its own momentum and it sees itself to completion because you've begun. My yoga teacher used to say the hardest part of any yoga practice, no matter how advanced you are, is getting on the mat and taking your first breath. In other words, just start. So that's a big piece of advice. And start with something small, not necessarily even knowing what the end project is going to look like, but just that you've made a beginning. The other thing is, and I find this really helpful, is to just change the channel on anything that feels mundane in your life. So for example, I'm very lucky. I live in a big city. I live in Sydney. So there's lots of beautiful opportunities for me to do things like, well, the library is just down the road. It's like an award-winning, incredible, beautiful space with, filled with books, which is like my idea of heaven. Or free art galleries, museums, there's an abundance of different things like that. Sometimes if I'm having a day where I'm just like feeling a bit bogged down or a little bit on the hamster wheel with my work and my life, I'll go to the art gallery for the afternoon and just, have a coffee, walk around. That completely resets everything for me, an afternoon like that, or a lunch with a girlfriend. Or I love to sing kirtan chanting, like anything that just is like a reset on feeling that things are a bit drudgy and a bit monotonous is really, really helpful, particularly something that nourishes your soul, like art, music, and of course nature is wonderful too. A walk in a forest, a swim in the ocean, what a great one. So yeah, doing something that just is out of your normal routine, that is nourishing for your spirit and your soul, will often then bring you back in to be able to sort of start taking these micro actions.
I love that. And also one of the things that I thought about too is reframing things. Just as soon as you were starting to explain it, you mentioned it in the redo my whole website. If we reframe things to, for example, going back to your example, starting with my about page and then breaking everything down into those micro tasks. That's a great tips, definitely. I'd like to talk about overcoming critics. I feel like we have kind of talked about that sort of lightly, but it really, the internal and external, one of the things I used to struggle with a lot was the idea of being criticized. And only just recently have I reframed criticism with feedback. And now I can see it and look at it completely differently. But I would like to hear sort of what your take on dealing with or overcoming criticism is.
I think this is another area in which we can go into polarity and we can say, I'm taking on board every criticism, and it's, you know, piercing through my heart, and it's hurting me, and it's impacting me emotionally, and it's completely overwhelming. Or I don't listen to criticism. I'm my own person. I don't want unsolicited advice or feedback. You know, you can take your feedback and you can blah, blah, blah. And my personal take is that an intelligent response to feedback or criticism, whether it is invited or not, is to practice discernment. Like, okay, this person has given me some feedback. First of all, let me look at who this person is. Is this someone who I value, I respect, I know? You know, like if your best friend comes to you and says, listen, I actually really want to give you some feedback about something. I think that you, whatever, could have handled this situation differently. I'm going to really sit up and listen at that point, because this is someone who I care about, whose opinion I value, who feels brave enough to give me some feedback like that. They're messages from the universe. Like, we need to listen in those moments. Kids, partners, our own parents, you know, whatever. Still through the filter of our own discernment, though. You know, like, is this more about the other person or is this about me? So that's the second part. First of all, who is it? Second part is it really about me or is it more about them? You know, sometimes, very rarely, I'm very, very fortunate. I deal with very few complaints in my business, but occasionally I might get an email from someone who's unhappy with something, like a course or something I said or whatever it might be, something I've put out into the world. And my very first question usually is, well, what's going on for them? You know, is this triggering for them for some reason because I've said something that, you know, has made them feel less than in some way? So, and then I can come back with a compassionate response and try to help them navigate through whatever it is they're going through, rather than feel completely blindsided because I've been criticized. And then the last thing is, you know, sometimes you just got to cop it, and it's because you've done the wrong thing and you haven't handled something well and you need to make a change. And just do it. Just make the change. I mean, one realization I had in my business recently, and this is very personal, and I'm not for a minute saying everybody has to do this, but it was a big change for me, was I used to offer pay in full options and then payment plan options. And the payment plan would always be a little bit more expensive than the pay in full, which is very normal. It's kind of industry standard. And the justification for that is, you know, you might lose payments because people default, or it's more admin to set up a payment plan, or whatever. There's reasons why organizations decide to do that. Now, I got the feedback from quite a few people saying it feels unfair that you're penalizing people that have less money. They have to pay more. So if you have more money, more resource in the beginning, you can afford to pay in full. You get the benefit of paying less than the person who is under-resourced and therefore needs a payment plan. They end up paying more. It feels like the equity there isn't quite fair. And in the beginning, if I'm honest, I was like, I'm not buying into this. This is just like manipulation. You know, it's already generous of me to offer a payment plan. And then over time, I started to think about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to change my mind on this. I totally get it now. I see, because I saw a big shift in my business from people paying in full to paying on payment plans, because we're in a challenging financial moment at the, you know, both here in Australia and in America. The cost of living is through the roof. People are struggling. We're all heading towards recession. We're dealing with post-pandemic crazy economies, political instability. A lot of people have switched to payment plan that initially or previously were able to pay in full. And I don't think that they should be penalized for that. In fact, I think if anything, there should be more opportunities for scholarships and for discounts for people in genuine financial need. And I have implemented now scholarship programs and trade programs for that reason. So that was as a result of feedback, and then me initially feeling a bit defensive, and then working through that and looking really honestly at my values and myself and changing my way. Now, that doesn't mean I feel terrible about myself because I used to charge more for payment plans and I'm beating myself up and I'm a bad person. No. As we know more, as we know better, we do better. And I'm learning and I'm growing, and I'm willing to change my mind, and I'm willing to take on board feedback if the person who's giving me the feedback is someone I respect, and if the feedback feels fair and reasonable, and that requires discernment on my part.
So true. And I think we forget that we can change our minds. You know, like whether it's the smallest little thing to the biggest thing. I think a lot of people forget that they can change their minds, they can change their values, they can change so much. I'm just watching time.
Yeah, I am going to have to hop off quite soon.
Okay.
That about changing your mind, though, it's so important, because we feel like often we're sort of trained culturally to think it's embarrassing to change your mind. So sometimes we're holding on to these outdated beliefs or these outdated ways of doing things that we don't actually even feel aligned with anymore, but we're doing it because to save face. And there's something so relaxing for everybody when you can just hold your hands up and say, I've changed my mind about this, I'm doing it differently. It's like everyone around you can kind of take a sigh of relief, because you're showing your human side, you're showing your humanity, and that's always beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Oh gosh, I feel like there's so much more that we could talk about. I didn't even really get into your women's health or anything, although some of these topics were lightly covered. Something that you had talked about was sharing that having the spark of an idea can lead to having a thriving business with a sense of focus and discipline. Discipline is something that you have brought up a couple of times. So I just want to go back to that. What have you found to be where does discipline come from for you?
Yeah. Can I speak just a little bit about the idea of the spark of an idea before I come to the discipline piece?
Yes.
So a lot of women in business or people in business think, in order to have a successful business, I need to have a completely new idea. I need to come up with something no one's ever done before, and I need to do it all differently. And I really want to speak out against that mentality, because it's so limiting. My business does nothing that has not been done before and is not being done by many other people. My main income is a yoga membership, a prenatal pregnancy yoga teacher training, and an Ayurveda training for yoga teachers. So they are all available all over the internet from hundreds of different people for lower cost than what I charge, and also for higher cost than what I charge. So if you go with the model of it has to be new and different and something have a unique selling point, then I wouldn't have a business at all. What makes my business and my offerings unique is that I created them, and I did so with genuine love and care and dedication and experience. And the people that come to me come because it's the right fit for them, and others will go elsewhere, and that's okay. So creating something from that spark of passion or that spark of interest from your heart with your own flavor, which it's going to have because it's come from you, that's enough. It doesn't have to be a completely new entity that no one's ever done before. It's enough to do something that you feel passionate about with skill, and with that discipline and that dedication. And I've seen many businesses created from that place alone. So I just wanted to say that everything's already been done before, and that's okay. We can still bring our own personal flavor, and that can be really beautiful and really successful. The discipline piece, look, what I find is I am a person that once I get started, momentum happens. So starting out is the hard part, but then once momentum is building, you're kind of in the thing, and that really helps. I also find accountability is really helpful. So for example, I have a social media manager and colleague that I work with now, and her and I often make a plan about things that we want to do, and then in the business, and then that creates its own momentum because there's timelines attached to that, and there's we're going to be launching this particular thing or running this particular offer at a certain time, and then that creates its own momentum. So it's a little bit like studying for an exam and having a study plan. You've got to have a vision of where you want to get to, and then work backwards with a plan from that. So if I want to launch a new training in, let's say, September, well, I've got to start thinking about building that now. So a bit of organization, a bit of kind of mapping out a timeline and then sticking to it, because when it's only you working for you, it's really easy to just shuffle everything around and go, oh, September could be November. And that's where the generating income piece is important. Like if I bump a launch or bump a new offering out by a month or a couple of months, well, that's loss of income for me. And that matters because I'm the sole breadwinner in my home. So that's relevant too. It depends on your circumstances. It depends on your situation. But generally speaking, planning is really important. Accountability, being in a group coaching program, having a mentor, even just a buddying up with another person, another woman in business. These are all really helpful things to do as well.
Oh, that's great. And that just brings me back to that whole idea of community, because even though we do all the things, we wear all the hats in our business, having a community, whether it's someone you've hired or a buddy that's also an entrepreneur, it's still someone that is supporting you. So before we say goodbye, is there anything else that you want to touch on that we didn't get a chance to? I feel like we could do a part 2, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it was such a great conversation. You had so many great questions, and we're real kindred spirits. I feel like you and I are, in similar kind of phases of life, and doing very similar things with similar outlook. So yeah, we could sit and talk for hours, I'm sure. But I feel like we got I was able to share some really beautiful things. So thank you for asking me such lovely questions.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on.
I have a couple of free resources I can share.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you for that. Oh, I can't wait to dive into both of them myself.
Great.
Well, Katie,
thank you
so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Same. I really enjoyed our conversation. Have a beautiful day with your kids. Hopefully the spider has exited now.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Anchor Your Dreams. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. A big thank you to our incredible guest for sharing their wisdom and insights. If you resonated with today's episode and want to explore more about turning your dreams into reality, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We have a lineup of amazing guests and valuable content coming your way. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Share your thoughts, insights, and your own journey using the hashtag #AnchorYourDreams. Head over to our website at meghanmcquillan.com in the podcast section, where you'll find the show notes, resources, and information about upcoming episodes. Before we wrap up, I want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you. Your support means the world to me, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Remember, anchored dreams become goals. Anchored goals become results. Until next time, dream big and stay anchored.